Thank you, everybody, and good afternoon. I just want to say welcome to everyone to this session of the Haagen-Smit Clean Air Awards, or Clean Air Leadership Talks. Apologies, the awards are tomorrow at our board hearing. But we will be honoring today in these talks the 2023 winners of the Haagen-Smit Clean Air Awards. And we're pleased and grateful to have presentations from all four winners. After a brief overview of the Haagen-Smit Award program, I will introduce each of the winners in turn before they present. After their presentations, we will have a panel discussion on a variety of topics, followed by questions from the audience. I just want to say it's great to see everybody here in person as well. Glad to have such a great audience for all of our amazing award winners. So next slide. Considered the Nobel Prize in Air Quality Achievement, the Haagen-Smit Clean Air Awards are named for CARB's first chairman, the late Dr. Ari Haagen-Smit. Dr. Haagen-Smit is best known as the father of air pollution control for his work linking the formation of smog in Southern California to automobile emissions in the 40s and 50s. Dr. Haagen-Smit, a native of the Netherlands, was a leader in developing air quality standards on his research efforts. He was a graduate at the University of Utrecht and a biochemistry professor at Caltech in Pasadena before beginning his air pollution research in 1948. His training and expertise in chemistry, along with his natural curiosity, brought him to the forefront of air pollution research when he was asked by the County of Los Angeles to investigate the chemical nature of what we now call smog. Dr. Haagen-Smit applied his techniques of studying plant chemistry in enclosed clear chambers exposed to sunlight to figure out what caused smog in the LA air basin. Through a series of experiments, he concluded that most of California's smog resulted from photochemistry, or when substances in the exhaust from motor vehicles and the smokestacks of industrial facilities react with sunlight to create ozone. This breakthrough provided the scientific foundation for the development of California and the nation's air pollution control programs. Dr. Haagen-Smit passed away in 1977, but his legacy lives on. Every year with the Clean Air Award, CARB recognizes individuals who embody his legacy. Through distinguished careers, these awardees have made outstanding contributions to improving air quality. They have influenced important changes throughout the United States and the world, protecting public health and the air we all breathe. Since 2001, we have had 79 Haagen-Smit Award winners, and we are adding 4 more this year. I would like to congratulate the winners of the 2023 Haagen-Smit Awards, Dr. Kofi Ajeko, Richard Flagan, Prasant Kumar, and Vicky Patton. At this time, I would also like to take the opportunity to thank the 5 members of the Haagen-Smit Awards Advisory Committee for their efforts. They're Alan Lloyd, Fran Pavley, and Yamita Roy Chowdhury, Barbara Finlayson-Pitts, and Margot Oge. In order to keep our schedule on track, after I introduce our in-person speakers, I'll sit here and I'll stand at the 3-minute mark to let folks know. So I'd like to introduce the first speaker in the category of environmental justice is Dr. Kofi Ajeko. He's the Director of Renewable Energy, Energy Efficiency, and Climate Change of the Ghana Energy Commission. He has been a leader in energy efficiency and energy conservation policies and programs in Ghana for decades, with expertise and impact that transcends international borders. He has fought against international trade practices of environmental dumping, where wealthy nations ship new and used consumer products, including outdated refrigerators and air conditioners with obsolete, high global warming potential refrigerants. And those are shipped to poor and developing countries that can ill afford the environmental, financial, and other burdens of such appliances. Welcome, Dr. Ajeko.
Good afternoon, wonderful audience and the board of CAB. My name is Kofi Ejako from Ghana, and I describe myself as the mouse that roared even louder than the lion. A big thanks. Yes. A big thanks to the board for considering my award. I'm overly excited. I know that CAB is a pioneer in science and analysis proving environmental policy. It is an incubator of rules and incentives reflecting the earth-on wisdom. CAB is a jump starter of environmental entrepreneurs yearning for market. CAB is an implementer locally inspiring global appropriate solutions. CAB recognizes people like me who subscribe to its greatness. And I want you to understand that the Haagen-Smit Award is my proudest moment. Who is Kofi Ejako? Permit me to take you through the life journey of this little mouse located somewhere in Africa in the western part called Ghana. I am a lifelong respecter of God's creation, that is earth, in all its details. When the Creator said after creation that everything is good, he meant it, that everything is good. Therefore, those of us, humankind, who have been entrusted with subduing the earth, have no business living recklessly. I got drawn to government by my unbridled ambition to protect the earth. I have a background in economics, environmental science, and business. And this is not just a rhetoric. I have recruited the most awesome team on this planet who is poised for action. And the team doesn't stop at anything apart from success. In the face of difficulties, challenges, in fact, danger, I remain resolute, especially when I am facing the corporate and the local demons who have made it their stock in trade to pollute the environment. No wonder on 3 occasions I have escaped lynching. But if you are driven by passion, you will be killed, but you will resurrect and finish your ambition before you die. And that is why I'm standing here. I have worked on minimum energy performance standards and labeling that put Ghana on the world map as the first country in Africa, south of the Sahara, to have mandatory standards. We started from 3, and now we can boast of 20. Almost all electrical appliances in Ghana are covered by standards and labeling. I'm aware of one thing that militates against energy efficiency, and that is the first cost barrier. And because of that, I have come up with a lot of financing mechanisms and market mechanisms to at least ameliorate that challenge. I have news to break, and the news is that in last year in Africa, Kenya to be precise, the meeting of parties to the Montreal Protocol acceded to a request that I led the entire African continent to put before it. And the request was to make it a point to stop the dumping of inefficient cooling appliances that run on obsolete refrigerants. These refrigerants, we all know, are not climate friendly. And we are running out of time before we hit climate tipping points. So the protocol admitted that now dumping is no longer the figment of anyone's imagination. It is a real problem that needs to be tackled head on. And it is to be stopped by shared responsibility. The exporting countries must ensure that they stop, and the importing countries must also ensure that they raise their boundaries. Beyond accepting this challenge, the protocol also made available $100 million to tackle the issue of efficiency. And I'm proud to report that soon after that, the United States Environmental Protection Agency announced rules prohibiting the export of new cooling appliances with refrigerants that do not qualify to be sold in the US. Then this year, 2024, EU also made a similar announcement that exports from the European Union must satisfy the European standards for environmental and technical performance. Yes, when a champion rose, the whole world are the beneficiaries. Now, before I take my seat, I want to answer a question that I am sure will come to me. That Kofi, what do you want CAB to do for you? What I want CAB to do for me is that it is a powerful institution, very respectable institution. And therefore, I need CAB to lend its weight behind this fight by partnering with companies on board the CAB F-gas and energy efficiency rules to capture export markets wherever dumping is present. That is my request number one. My request number two is that come on board, help explain globally, because your voice goes very far, that the first cost is certainly paid back. And we all need to join hands to save the planet. In fact, the survival of the planet is non-negotiable. Keep on doing what you are doing, CAB. That has earned you the reputation. In fact, when all else go to sleep, I expect an institution like CAB to wake people up and remind all of us that time is running out. We need to work fast before we hit climate tipping point. And to leave with you, this is what I want to leave with you, that the next generation needs hope to live. And the hope is in the hands of those of us sitting here, especially those of us who have the power to make rules, decisions. Decisions that we make must be devoid of regional interest, national interest, business interest, personal interest, but in the interest of Mother Earth, so that we make way for the next generation to also come enjoy the earth the Creator created for all of us. Dumping actually is climate injustice. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for such an inspiring talk, and one that rings true so much as we see natural disasters happening so recently in the US and everywhere. So really appreciate that conversation. I'm now happy to introduce Richard Flagen, who's professor of chemical engineering and environmental science and engineering at the California Institute of Technology. Dr. Flagen is a globally recognized and innovative experimentalist and researcher in aerosol science and instrumentation. In 1975, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology graduate joined the California Institute of Technology faculty to study aerosol science. Throughout his career, Dr. Flagen has made transformative contributions to the field of aerosol science, developing innovative measurement technologies and advancing the understanding of aerosol dynamics and their environmental impacts. One of his most remarkable contributions to clean air was the development of novel aerosol measurement instruments that dramatically improved the accuracy and scope of atmospheric studies. Welcome, Dr. Flagen.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. You've heard a little bit about my background. I'd like to walk through some pictures to show you a little bit of the path and how the measurements dealing with the detail ultimately leads to improvement in our understanding on the big picture items. So the question of particles in the air has been a long-standing question. It actually goes back for many, many centuries. The word smog was coined to describe these events that occurred in London. It was defined around 1906. It was not just first invented to describe the Los Angeles smog. Britain had a huge pollution problem, producing incredible smog, but it was a relatively simple problem. It was a problem that was very strongly related to the burning of coal. And that burning of coal emits particles, sulfur oxides, into the atmosphere that ultimately make the smog. And during subsidence inversions that killed thousands of people over, in one case, 5,000 people in 1 week, they recognized that they had a need to solve the problem. They banned burning of coal for heating in residences, and they built tall smokestacks to export their problem, ultimately creating the acid rain crisis. Los Angeles, the smog started early in the 20th century, and it became a very serious problem and continued to be until, if we go on to the next slide, Haagen-Smit came along. Now, I had the privilege of getting to know Ari a little bit. He was a biochemist. He was studying the chemistry of taste, trying to develop synthetic artificial flavors. At the end of the day, he'd come out of his laboratory and he could taste the smog. And he asked, "What is it I taste?" And he collected, using a cryogenic trap, a few cc's of essence of smog and analyzed it and found huge amounts of organic nitrates. And that led him on his quest to ultimately understand where that was coming from. He ultimately identified the fundamental mechanism that underlies photochemical smog, one of the key sets of reactions, and went beyond that to understand the roles of organics in that process. But he was more than just a laboratory chemist. He went on to find ways to start to address that problem. He developed one of the very early low-cost sensors, a stretched rubber band from the Caltech Computing Center. And as one side was exposed to the air, the other side was protected. One side would lose its elasticity, raising the needle, and he could measure the smog development on the scale of hours, measure the effects of the ozone. But there were a lot of other things that went on. This is all before I got involved in the field, although I did experience the smog early on. Sometime in the late 50s, I came to Los Angeles, was here for 2 weeks. I never saw my shadow, got an incredible sunburn, my lungs hurt. It was terrible. I swore I'd never live any place like that. Never say never. Go on. So there were a number of things going on. One was the development of instruments and commercialization of instruments by a fellow by the name of Ken Whitby, who ultimately, in a couple of large experiments in Southern California, developed a picture model of the nature of the aerosol, showing 3 modes in the distribution, and setting people on the quest to understand more than just the mass of particles in the air. That was all before I got to Caltech. And one thing more was there was a young faculty member by the name of John Seinfeld, who we just celebrated his 100th PhD, most on air quality, in which he set out to devise ways to use chemical engineering principles to devise control strategies. And Sheldon Friedlander brought in some experimental methods and the beginnings of a dynamic model of smog to try to understand it. Ultimately, that seed was the seed that led to the models that we use now for controlling air quality, and went up beyond that to the models that are used to understand global climate change. We go on. I got involved when I joined the faculty. I had never done any work on the atmosphere. I'd never taken an environmental course. I studied mechanical engineering. I'd done my research in combustion. When I interviewed, in my interview at Caltech, I was convinced that this problem of the smog was something that really needed to be understood. I joined the Caltech faculty, changed my field completely. A ridiculous thing for a starting assistant professor, smartest thing I ever did. That, if we go back 1 second, that chamber there was a big Teflon balloon that we used to simulate the smog. Initially, experiments were done with these chambers. Haagen-Smit had done small, very tiny experiments. This was large enough to actually get to the aerosol, 60 cubic meter reactor. We started using it, but the original version, it was dirty, drew in ambient air. We cleaned up the air. We started pushing it to the point that we could start being quantitative. If we go on, the instruments we had, though, were too slow. They didn't have good enough resolution. I got very frustrated with my students spending months trying to make sense out of a trivial amount of data, and ultimately started pushing the bounds on the instruments. And one of the instrument that I'm probably best known for is the scanning mobility particle sizer, which came out of a class I was teaching, and it allowed us to make measurements fast. So I'll just walk you really quick through an experiment done in that same chamber. Here we have an experiment where we have an initial size distribution of seed particles that we put in so that the vapors would condense on those seeds. So we could try to be quantitative in determining the yield of secondary aerosol. Next. If we go out 1 minute, used to take half an hour to do this measurement. We could do it in 1 minute. We could see that growth. But we also saw, ultimately, new particles beginning to be formed. And if we go on, if we go minute by minute, we can see the continued growth both of the seed particles and the new particles. Fast measurements made that possible. They made it possible to be quantitative in how much aerosol was produced. That became a key input for the models. That allowed the models to be something that, when delivered to CARB, could be used to conduct computational experiments to try to devise control strategies. We go on. The outdoor chamber, though, didn't give us enough control. So we improved the chambers, we moved them indoors. If we built flow reactors. Ultimately, we've built a very modern reactor that uses synthetic air. It's clean enough to allow us to look at air quality and understand the difference between the atmosphere in the pre-industrial era, for which we have zero data. But we can conduct experiments now finally clean enough to probe that period and look at the dynamics of the particles and the gases in that system. If we go on, with this, we can now begin to look at the dynamics of the atmospheric aerosol. The details are not so critical as the fact that we've started out with the LDMA, a commercially available instrument, very expensive, $100,000 these days to buy that unit. One of my concerns is we need more instruments out there to try to understand the distribution of pollution beyond the, for example, for LA, the 40 or so measurement stations. We need detailed networks, expanded networks. A first step in that direction is illustrated there. We see basically the same thing with the two different measurements. And we can go on. A recent experiment out of the cloud experiment at CERN using a state-of-the-art instrument. On the left, we have a particle size versus time picture, color map of particles formed on sulfuric acid nucleation, growth by ammonia or by organics condensing. If we added a little bit of ammonia and the nitric acid to that system, suddenly we would see much more rapid growth. This is a dynamic that was not appreciated. We now see it around the world. We see it in the troposphere, we see it in the stratosphere, we see it in Beijing in the wintertime, and we see it in events happening in Los Angeles. Next. But the experiments themselves are not enough. We have to parameterize those experiments and take them out into the world. One way to do that is through global models. So we parameterize data and develop models here looking at biogenic, naturally emitted hydrocarbons in the modern era on the right and in the pre-industrial era on the left. And we see new particle formation that's occurring. Half the particles in the global atmosphere today are formed from the gas phase in the atmosphere. We've taken this out into the field. We put many instruments into the airplane, one scientist who's got to run them all, and we go and fly and probe things like that cloud on the lower left, where you see the cloud base being brought down by the emissions from the Conesville coal-fired power plant in Ohio. We flew through that plume, very nasty plume. I was in the airplane for that. We've flown through worse as well, the Harris Ranch plume. We've also looked at, with modern mass spectrometry, we can now get chemistry with that same resolution. We didn't develop those chemical tools. Those were developed by companies, but they've been developed targeting the science. And the key here is the measurement needs to target the objective of the data that you're after. What are you trying to learn? You need measurements that are aimed at that. You don't need the instrument that you can buy off the shelf. Sometimes you can, often you cannot. You need to design your measurement strategy to give you the data that's required to answer your question. We built many instruments. We go on to the next one. This was a CARB-sponsored project that one of my colleagues had to look at the chemistry of fog water. When he was getting this project started, he asked me to join him for lunch, and over lunch, he asked me how to do the measurements. He showed me his idea. I said why I didn't think it would work. I sketched on the placemat 3 designs. We had a hyperactive French-American graduate student who took the worst of the ideas and for the first quarterly report showed data that CARB released as a press release. So 3 months into the project, we were having the London Times coming to Caltech to take pictures of this device. It was a rotating arm collector. It was rotated at very high speed. Ultimately, one of those sensors had what I feared, which was a fatigue failure, launched an arm off it, which went quite a ways. I immediately put a cease and desist order to all of the students involved in the project. I wanted every single instrument back at Caltech within 12 hours, and they were all back within 12 hours. And then we had to develop alternate instruments. An undergraduate took on the middle design, which used some strings. We originally had vertical strings with an airflow being sucked over it. Particles would fly off the string, incline the strings to go the directions the particles went. We were collecting then fog water and being able to measure the highly acidic fog. The best of the designs, that took one of the students who was not in the project, was around it, to do after he left Caltech, and that was the one that got away. There's one more point that I would like to make very quickly. We go on to the last slide. We need to think with particles. When we're looking at health, we need to think about what it is that determines health. In the initial discussion of PM 2.5 back around 1978, it was looking at that fraction deposited versus size that people assessed that we needed to measure particles smaller than about 2.5 microns in order to get the particles which, when breathing at rest, would penetrate to the lower airways. So PM 2.5 was born, and it's designed to collect all the particles smaller than PM 2.5. But if you look at the fraction deposited in the range for about 0.3 microns, 80% of the particles you inhale, you exhale. They're not deposited. So PM 2.5 is really overweighting those accumulation mode particles, those intermediate sized particles, relative to the ultrafine particles that we're now learning are very important to health, and also to the coarse particles. PM 2.5 is a fantastic tool in specifying what air quality exposure we would need to assess. But we need to think beyond that. We need to think about what are the standards we need in the next generations, in the next decades. How do we emphasize those ultrafines? How do we make those decisions? So we need to be thinking beyond exposure to dose, because it's only the particles that deposit that are going to have a health impact in the respiratory system. And I think I will stop there and leave the other points for discussion in the interest of keeping on time.
Thank you so much. And it's always great to have a reminder of how much we've achieved in a relatively short period on both air quality and the instrumentation side, and where we need to go in meeting and what we can achieve in the coming years to meet our future targets. So thank you. Next, I'm proud to introduce Prashant Kumar, Professor and Chair of Air Quality and Health at the University of Surrey. He has been awarded the 2023 Haagen-Smit Clean Air Award in the category of international education. Dr. Kumar has been active in research and education across the globe. After earning degrees in civil and environmental engineering in India, Dr. Kumar completed a doctorate in engineering at the University of Cambridge. specializing in measurements and dispersion modeling of nanoparticles in the urban environment. Dr. Kumar then joined the University of Surrey, where he is currently the Associate Dean. His widespread public outreach and education work has distinguished him as an academic who takes his research to the end users, from policymakers to the public. Welcome, Dr. Kumar.
Thank you very much for the opportunity and giving this platform to talk about some of the work I've been doing over the years. 10 minutes is not a lot, so I try to keep it to the level where I can possibly convey the key messages. So I think the question you might be, we always kind of think, how can we move that forward? Yeah, so I think one of the questions which we usually, could think about is, we can't live without the air for long. You can live without water for at least a couple of days, the food for a few more days. But the question then is that, do we all breathe the same air? So if you go to the next slide, I think there is a very kind of a famous quote from former President John F. Kennedy, who famously, gave a speech that was possibly not the most popular at that time. But he said a few things which were quite interesting. So one of the things was that let's direct our attention to common interests. And most common link we all have is that this small planet we inhabit, and we all breathe the same air, and we all cherish our children's future. So I just wanted to kind of ponder a little bit more on that. If you go to the next slide, please. This is a map. You could see it's a 2023 map. And this is showing the PM 2.5 concentrations. One of the interesting things to note would be that blue part, actually, which is showing the PM 2.5 less than 5 microgram per meter cube, which are the World Health Organization's recommendations for annual PM 2.5. If look around this map, you will firstly observe that most of these countries which are the highest populated have also got the highest exposure. And another thing you will note is the majority of the world does not really adhere to these kind of the recommendations. Now, if you try to look around the cities, so you don't need to bother about the text, but you can see there are 114 cities on this map. And this line shows the 5 microgram limit. So on the left-hand side, you will mostly see these are the countries from Africa and Asia, which is more red and going to red and even redder. And then on the left side, you are seeing there are mostly the countries from Europe and USA. But again, if you look at that 5 microgram sort of regional limit, then you can clearly see that it's not something which is happening very often. So the answer to the question is no, we do not all breathe the same air. And this is not the challenge for one, but it's a challenge for all the cities. And this is a fantastic example of how differently we are treating the pollution problem across the world. So if you look this little map there, it shows the different, the regulations which countries are adopting. So this starts with WHO looking at 5 microgram per meter cube. The US EPA, I must say that they are most advanced in terms of getting 9. And I put a little line there actually, which is showing the curve, which is 12. And then you got European Council, the China and the India. And the most interestingly, you will see that the India and China, if you try to look into the population, that would possibly meet one of the 3 people on this planet. And the levels actually of the allowable, the exposure is quite high. So in a way, that if you really wanted to, bring this environmental injustice, which is happening to the people all across the world, is something where we need actually to think about where the biggest gains are. At the same time, if you look around, out of this over 8 billion people, how many of them are really going into the range of 5 microgram per meter cube? And the answer is none. So, and this problem becomes even bigger. So this data I was showing is the annual average. Now, if you try to look into in the daily lives, like when, let's say, you are going from your office to your home, and if you're using a bus or using a car or taking a walk or using a bicycle. So you could see that 5 microgram kind of thing never even exists actually in this map. So on the x-axis, you are seeing the concentrations in Europe. On the y-axis, you're looking into the concentrations in Asia. And the important thing here is that obviously you will expect that the Asian countries having much higher exposure, which you can think from the diversity in terms of the regulations, but also the technology and the kind of fuel they are using. So, the question again there is that no, the things get even worse when we try to look into the micro scale, and get even more worse actually if you go into the super micro scale. So this is a fantastic example of a study which came out of the curiosity when I used to go to drop my son to the school, and he was very young. And when we were looking, when I was standing on the traffic light, I could see the fumes coming onto my face. So I thought, okay, as an adult, I can possibly deal that. But this little guy, who is just a year old, he might be getting quite a high exposure there. So we just run this study, try to look into what's happening, to the children when they are in the pram. And that work basically highlighted some of the very interesting features in the sense that, and these are the ultrafine particles, by the way. So you're talking about 2,000 particles per centimeter cube is something around the background concentrations where you got a little bit cleaner air. And that's getting worse to almost 1.6 million particles per centimeter cube at the traffic lights or in the street canyons where the air is trapped. So you can think about the impact of the pollution which is happening, and that really does not get into the attention of the regulations. The reason being that the regulations are either 8 hours averages or 24 hours averages or annual averages, but you always, the miss is those peaks actually that make a huge difference. And then comes to the indoor air. For example, when you're cooking, and that's basically one of the worst activity when you can have the highest exposure, but we need to cook. So this was a study which we launched in 12 cities that included in Middle East, Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America. And we tried to look into what kind of, the different conditions makes the exposure worse. So there were a lot of things looking into the ventilation. For example, how your kitchen is ventilated, that makes a huge difference. Occupancy, whether do you really want the children or the people who are not really be in the business to be there in the kitchen at the time if you want to reduce their exposure? Different type of fuel and type of food actually you are cooking. So one of the worst we found was the frying. When you're frying the activity, like the frying the meat, you got really high kind of the exposures, and obviously the fuel actually that made a huge difference as well. So the whole idea there was then how we can empower the community. And I started then engaging with a very smaller, the school children to the policymakers, to the, the politicians, and then started creating actually a lot of this work into the guidances, tools like the hedge date, which you can design your own hedges. The Heat Cool is a program actually which can allow the children to play around and can understand about the thing. So the whole idea there was, can we go from design to co-design? Can we change actually the way we think in terms of first doing the things and sharing with the community rather than first co-design, co-implement, and then the people who are getting involved could get involved in terms of the owning the solutions there. And this is one of the examples of the work we did, where we tried to look into the passive solutions in terms of the green infrastructure, and divided the urban environment into the street and the open environments, and tried to see that what kind of the green vegetation you wanted to put in the trees, in the streets, and which you don't. And this was the work which opened up quite a lot of the opportunities in this area, and that was the 2023 Haagen-Smit Prize for the best paper winner as well. So we went further ahead. So this is one of the latest work which might be coming in very soon, where we try to look into the different type of green and blue infrastructure. So the interesting thing is that, did you ever think that we got almost 51 different type of green and blue things, like the hedges, trees, and other things in there? And then what kind of mitigation these could provide in terms of reducing the exposure to the people living in those cities there? And this is one kind of very interesting project where my son goes in. This is a example of a co-design. It's a school very next to the busy road, and then you got basically the school boundaries being porous, and then we talked about them, and they say, you know what, we wanted to do something with it. So this is one of the designs which are done by a parent. And then we try to kind of look into, having the counselors, having the head teacher, having the charity organizations, looking into that, and then try to kind of, find the way. It took us almost 4 or 5 years to reach to a point where we could get the money. And then this is possibly the first living scale school gate in the UK, where the plants were planted by the children. And it was owned actually by the school there. The gate moves, so this is the beauty of it. So it doesn't, obstruct the functionality. And on the back of that, we created the evidence base in terms of how much noise is being reducing, how much pollution is reducing. And noise was not in the agenda, and that came as a bonus when we were told that, by the way, then this gate is making a huge difference. And we had done then the whole kind of the green in there as well. So what we see at the moment is that we got a fantastic complex science in the terms of the papers and patents and the models. And this is the research community which is doing that. And then this is basically the one which is creating the science. And then we got the end users, which is the public community. And they need the simplified version of that complex science. And at the moment, what we see is this link is broken. So whatever science in making is very little actually that goes science in practice. And what we really need here is that link is not thinly pointed, rather widely penetrating. And to my last slide to finish it, when we're moving ahead towards the net zero and the zero pollution cities, so one of the most important things you saw during the pandemic was the indoor air. And this is one of our recent science papers where we have been advocating to bring the standards for the indoor air. Even in this room we are sitting, we even don't know what we are inhaling, what sort of the levels of particles are. So the whole idea of this work is that can we really push into this direction where we spend majority of the time. The other bit which our previous awardee was speaking about, the ultrafine particles. You can see the history. These are known to have the adverse impact on the health, but we still do not have any regulations in place. And this is something we need to do. And while we are moving towards the net zero and the zero pollution, the non-exhaust emissions are another one. The only way you can break those boundaries and can achieve those targets is the multidisciplinarity. This is not really an area which is led by civil engineers, mechanical engineers, biochemists, or chemists. Rather, everyone has got an important role to play, and you need that collaborative approach if you wanted to achieve the clean air for all. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And I realize I should not be the one keeping track of time because I get so pulled into each of these presentations that I forget to actually do that. But thank you so much. That was a great discussion on the disparities as well as what can be achieved with scientists really being able to communicate with communities and some of those local solutions that can be found. And as someone who oversees the research for the agency and seeing the focus that you had and that we have on indoor air and the tire and brake wear side of things, the non-exhaust, it's really nice to see you mention that as well. So thank you. And then finally, I would like to introduce this year's fourth Haagen-Smit awardee in the category of policy, Vicki Patton, who is the General Counsel for the Environmental Defense Fund. Ms. Patton has been integral in upholding numerous national and state climate change and air quality standards by utilizing science-based analysis, partnerships, public education, and strategic litigation. An environmental attorney and resolute clean air advocate, Ms. Patton has dedicated over 30 years to improving and protecting clean air regulations and promoting healthier air and a safer climate for all people and communities. She has been a powerful California ally, and her leadership and integrity have made her one of the most respected and accomplished leaders within the environmental nonprofit community. Welcome, Ms. Patton.
Thank you so much. I'm very, very grateful. I'm going to start with gratitude, talk about uncertainty, and then turn to hope. There are so many people who opened doors for me during my journey, and I am just so grateful. Too many to name, can't begin to name them all at all different times and moments. Just going to share one example. When I was an undergrad, I had a really strong interest in environmental law. I didn't know any lawyers. So I knocked on the door of the attorney at the Arizona Center for Law and the Public Interest. That was the only public interest attorney at that time in my home state. And he answered the door, welcomed me in, and let me get some insight into what it was like to try to be an environmental advocate through law. It was a tremendous experience. And this has repeated itself throughout my journey over and over again. When I was knocking on doors, so many people answered. And so I want to say to everyone who is on their journey now, please knock on the doors. And please know that when you knock on the doors, there are uplifting people, people with generosity of spirit who will answer. So please knock on those doors. Uncertainty. When I started out 1,000 years ago at the Environmental Protection Agency, it was a time when Congress was debating the 1990 Clean Air Act amendments. People kind of came together, rolled up their sleeves, forged common ground, ushered in sweeping amendments to the Clean Air Act that had enormous, profound benefits, responding to very, very serious problems, anchored in the science, right, and compelled by the science, and united and catalyzed by people being able to collaborate and communicate. It's driven just an enormous amount of progress. Everything has changed since then. So from that moment where we had the Senate ushering in sweeping amendments to the Clean Air Act in a vote that was 89-10, overwhelmingly, and our country coming together, and EPA working with the states, led by California, rolling up its sleeves to kind of carry out that law and translate the words on paper into really tangible benefits for people's lives. We now find ourselves in a world that is polarized, in a world where there is this very, very pluralistic society where we have lots of misinformation and lots of acrimony and lots of ways in which we are all divided. And in that world, we know we have a North Star. And our North Star is to ensure community health with great urgency. Our North Star is to address the scourge of environmental injustices with great urgency. Our North Star is to address science-based climate progress with great urgency and at scale, and to tackle all of those problems. And in that moment and in that uncertainty, there are real questions about how do we kind of move forward? How do we find enduring solutions? And so I hope, and in the time we have to talk at the end, that we'll talk about that and we'll get your ideas about how do we ensure durable solutions in a world that is deeply polarized and divided. And in that world, there is hope. There is hope. And right now, we are living in a moment where the zero emitting solutions, the cleanest solutions, are the least expensive solutions. And that is just an enormous, enormous opportunity to make great, great progress. And what does that mean? What that means is that we had a colleague who just did an analysis a couple of months ago and just looked at the investments that have happened in EV manufacturing in the United States in the last 9 years. It's published in August. And in the last 9 years, it's over $200 billion of investments, over 200,000 jobs created directly, many, many more indirectly. Those jobs are being created in Georgia and Michigan and California and Nevada and Arizona and Kentucky and Tennessee and communities all across our country where there is a manufacturing renaissance and jobs being created. Most of those have come just in the last 2 years, far and away in the last 2 years. And they're coming from this duality of policy and investment. And that policy of duality and investment is a very important and powerful tool. And it was really pioneered and it's catalyzed here in California, where you help lead the way with policy. You've helped made very significant investments, and they have been kind of a pillar and a foundation for national scale progress. And in that moment, and in this time of kind of great opportunity, we need to make sure that we are growing our movement. And so what does that mean? How do we grow our movement? It means that for the children who are the first children to create a gate that has, is protecting their school from air pollution, they are part of our movement. It means that if your passion is community organizing, there is a place for you, and we need you in our movement, right? We need it bigger and better, bigger tent, more people. If your passion is engineering and science, we need you in this moment, working together, coming together in this moment of opportunity to make great progress with great urgency. In a moment where there's zero emitting solutions that can address the climate crisis, that can address community inequities, that can help us make great, great progress, they are the lowest cost solutions. If your passion is, science, economics, if you love tax, there is a place for you. This is all happening right now in this moment. And so how do we all kind of find a way in this moment to make sure that everyone knows that not only is there a place for them, but we need them. And we want them to be part of this solution. And we want to all work together to address these challenges. And not only when you knock on the doors will we open the doors, but we will knock those doors down so that there is a place for you forever. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Again, such an inspiring talk about the power of collaboration and working together, and how there is a role for everybody in what we're doing and the challenges we have to meet on air quality and climate change. So now I'm going to ask folks to come up to the chairs up here, our 4 award winners, and I will have some questions. I just also want to once again congratulate all of them if they could come up, if y'all could come up to the table. Right, so I will start with some questions and I will open up to the room for questions as well. I have a couple here, so let me see which one to go with first. Let's start with what factors influenced your decision to go into your chosen field of work? Who would you like?
Yeah, thank you very much. In my case, my passion to go into this field was rekindled by 3 factors. The first one is that I chanced upon a research that indicated that children who live in polluted environment suffer from upper respiratory health problems. The second one was that I also discovered that because of the lack of standards in Africa and most developing countries, some unscrupulous multinationals had made it their game plan to dump energy inefficient cooling appliances that run on obsolete refrigerants that are climate unfriendly on Africa. And that can be split into 2. When that happens, you can call it exported poverty. When you use an energy inefficient appliance, you end up paying more in electricity bills. So consumers are robbed of monies that could have been used in quality of life, like nutrition, education, and all that go into utility bills. Then, on the other hand, looking at it from the national perspective, governments are under pressure to expand generation capacity that the ever-rising demand of electricity is calling for. So governments are also, they also deprive citizens of quality of life. They don't construct good roads, hospitals, schools, and everything is channeled into generation capacity expansion. On top of it, most countries use fossil fired thermal plants, which pollute the environment. So I sat down, considered all these factors, pondered over them, and I decided that in my own small way, I will begin something in my country, and maybe if I succeed, it can be replicated across the continent. And that is what actually pushed me into it. Thank you.
I, as I mentioned, saw the bad air pollution in Southern California when I was 10 or 11 years old. And that had a big impact on me. When I was an undergraduate studying mechanical engineering, one summer I worked for a power company doing stack emission measurements and saw there the industrial practice that was the source of not the problems in LA, but related problems. When I started at Caltech, I was exposed to the challenges of aerosols. And one thing that I saw was, first, there's some problems that are of immense importance to people. But I also saw a problem where the background that I had, the many different things that I had done, all gave me vantage points that let me see the problem in a different way than other people had. And so that gave me a pathway to start building something new. This has recurred throughout. There have been many areas in aerosols that I have touched on, from refining of silicon, improving the energy efficiency of producing solar cells from what was originally about 10 to the minus 3, starting to move that up by replacing technologies which have since been superseded by radically different technologies. But I kept being drawn back to the questions of the ambient atmosphere. Questions like a local allergist coming to me and asking the question, why is it that pollen causes asthma in kids? Particles are too big to get deep in the airways. How can that work? Well, I ended up collaborating with a botanist to identify a mechanism by which the pollen allergens got out into the air in small enough particles to get deep in the lung where they could do the damage. But then talking with colleagues at the USC School of Medicine, I saw data, epidemiological data, showing a high incidence of asthma among children who live within 100 meters of major roadways. And in Los Angeles, half the population lives within 500 meters of major roadways. Continuously, I've been exposed to problems where there are huge problems with potentially huge impacts, but also that I have been able, through having read lots of things outside my field, by listening to people in totally different communities, that I've been able to view them in new ways and guide me to trying to find ways to help get the data, to help to understand these things quantitatively. And I find that just incredibly rewarding. Going out, I'm not the person who's going to go out into the community to interact with the local community and get that engagement. That's not my major skill set. But I can certainly work with people who have that and try to help that happen. And one thing that I see as one of the real challenges we're facing is how do we get people with backgrounds like mine to interact with people who have those other skill sets, who have the ability to bridge the very different life experience backgrounds to get that community engagement that lets real solutions happen.
From a very small village in India, where with a very modest family, so lived in sort of poverty, where the first thing comes to the mind is that how you can make money and how you can sustain your family. The most interesting thing which I saw during the time, which is still happening, I still got my parents there, I visit them every year, is they're still cooking their food using the cow dung, the gas sometimes, and mostly the biomass. And I've seen my family members, friends, their families, coughing. And if you look currently, when I go to my village there or in that area, I would still see almost everyone over the age of 30 is having some sort of health issues. So I could not understand at the time that what it is causing. I felt that maybe is that they're not getting the good food, it's not the good environment. I never thought that it's air pollution. So for my first studies, which it's been a quite long journey to get to a PhD, to start with a diploma in civil engineering, because that was the cheapest and that was the easiest way for me to get into the technical education. So I chose civil engineering, thinking that it has got a very strong environmental engineering component. And when I learned a little bit more about it, And that allowed me to understand that, there is a lot more I could do. And this is basically air pollution, which is causing a lot of the issues there. Then I pursued my master's from IIT Delhi in environmental engineering and management. And I did my dissertation looking into the respirable particulate matter in and across, at the city of Delhi. And it was quite eye-opening, because when I was living in the village in my childhood, I always thought that the cities are the best place. People have got good life, they got good money, they got vehicle, they got everything. But when I look at the results of the study, that was eye-opening in the sense that they were even worse than what you were having in that village area. But back then, the problem was that air pollution in early 2000s, especially in India, was not a topic actually where you can get a job. So that family pressure was still there. So I decided then to pursue my PhD from University of Cambridge, looking into the nanoparticles in urban environments. And that is an area which is even more riskier, because when you're talking about the PM 2.5, PM 10, at least you got some opportunities of getting a job. You're going into a territory which is largely unstudied, and then you are basically thinking that you might want you to get a good job while you want to make a big difference there as well. But then one thing I always said to myself, that whatever you're doing, do your best. So I tried my hard to get into the good results from my PhD, getting some good publications that led me to getting a lecturership position even before completing my PhD at the University of University of Surrey. And thanks to them that they gave me that opportunity. And that allowed me that platform to develop the research, to develop the collaboration, to work with the community, to work with the brilliant scientists around you, and to work globally. Because as I showed in my presentation, the places where you can make the most difference are also the places where they lack resources, they lack understanding, and there is a need actually to empower the people there. So this is where this journey for me started, and this is where I am currently. And when I launched this center, the Global Center for Clean Air Research, and gave that tagline of the clean air for all, so I really mean with it. So I wanted to push forward myself to make sure that I make the biggest difference I could make in my personal capacity, and working together with colleagues to have that kind of dream true at some point, which says the clean air for all. Thank you.
Yeah, just two considerations. One is growing up in a place where there was just rapid change and a lot of very serious threats that were emerging and intensifying, and seeing kind of who was bearing the burden from those threats, and then believing in and seeing kind of the ability of solutions to drive change that really benefits people's lives. I cannot tell you how many conversations I have been in during my journey where people said that is not possible, can't be done, can't do it, no way. And time again, seeing that, in fact, when people work together, when they work together, anchored in science and, collaborating and believing in the ability to drive change, it happens. And it's happened over and over again. 20 years ago, the carbon pollution from the power sector in the US was 2.5 billion tons every year. Right now, it's 1.4 billion tons. Is it low enough? No. Do we need to go faster? Yes. But that's, people thought that was not possible. The, conversation around zero emitting vehicles, so many times people said, can't do it, not possible, no way, no how. And, it's happening, and it's happening all across the country. At the same time, you're seeing this incredible manufacturing renaissance. At the same time, people are saving money and realizing they're saving money from vehicles that are much cheaper to operate and to drive. And so seeing these benefits for people's lives, being part of the conversations where people said, can't clean up diesel, not possible, no way, no how, and seeing it happen, and the profound lives saved. And this repeats itself over and over again. I was in a meeting on Friday with the largest power company in my state, and that power company was sharing that they're on their way to achieving over 90% renewables by 2030, and doing that in a way that is actually keeping rates lower than they otherwise would be. It's the cheapest path forward. And that same company, when I first started in my work at Environmental Defense Fund, led the opposition to Colorado's adoption of the Renewable Electricity Standard. And so over and over again, when we all work together, we believe in the path forward. It's been achieved, and knowing that it has really, really far-reaching benefits for people's lives in terms of healthier communities, addressing the climate crisis, getting at some of the roots of environmental injustices, and creating shared economic opportunity.
Thank you. So my next question is, what is the most important obstacle that needs to be overcome in each of your areas of work? And I'm going to add a little thing on there. Are there any recommendations that you would give on how to overcome those? Whoever would like to start.
One of the questions in trying to understand air quality is, as we've heard, to go beyond measurements at central stations, at a few locations where we can have fancy instruments to do the job, to getting it out there so that we can actually understand what people are being exposed to, what their ultimate dose is of the pollutants that are out there in the air. We need to get it out and distribute it widely enough to capture those hot spots in the communities. That's not going to be done with the current generations of research-grade instruments that cost $100,000 to, some of the instruments that are critical to current science, $750,000. You're not going to solve the problem of understanding the full spectrum of impacts on people with that kind of instruments. You're also not going to do it with sensors that were designed to tell someone when it's time to change the ventilation filter in the polluted cities of China, which is what the low-cost sensors for particulate matter were designed as. They were not designed to provide scientific data. They were designed to help advertise the building as saying we have clean air in the building. We need instruments that are scientifically valid and cost-effective to create the dense networks, to look both at outdoor air pollution, but we also, as we've heard, need to look at indoor air pollution. We need to do that not just in the developed world. Some of the biggest effects of indoor air quality really come in the underdeveloped portions of the world, where they are relying on fuels such as cow dung to provide their heating, to do their cooking. We need to change that paradigm. Currently, the agencies that are out there funding development of the tools of science assume that companies develop the instruments. Sometimes that's true. Very often it's not. They don't generally have mechanisms to support people who are trying to solve the problems of how we get the tools out there. So we need to think about the whole scope of the problem. The agencies need to come on board in helping to engage the community that can provide the tools. We need to get people working at the community interface to help disperse those tools where they are most needed.
Yes. I face two main obstacles in the work that I do. One is internal, one is external. Talking about the external obstacle, more often than not, I come across a statement that because of poverty, Africa cannot afford quality products that come with cutting-edge technology. So let us dump anything at all on them. As if Africa is condemned to the garbage bin. And it has taken me a good number of years to disabuse the minds of people who do that. I know that it is just a game plan to feel good and continue to dump environmentally unfriendly appliances in Africa. So it is a major obstacle because so long as they persist, then it's going to make my work difficult. And that is the reason why I advocate that all countries in Africa should raise their barriers against the influx of those things. But it is easier said than done. Raising barriers against the influx of obsolete technology is not an easy thing. So that is what I face externally. Locally, I get crazy with government's willingness to recruit people who do not have the capacity to deliver in this climate war and air pollution that we are waging. For whatever reason, you find somebody occupying the position, and that person serves as an obstacle. Instead of you using a champion, using your energies to fight for success, you may have to spend a lot of energies trying to overcome that local obstacle. And that is crazy. Secondly, we also have people who, although know what to do to achieve success, but they prioritize comfort, perks that come with the position more than actually gunning for success. So you realize that if you are somebody who stops at nothing than to achieve the desired results, you get frustrated in an environment like that. You get frustrated. I don't have a better word to use than frustration. If care is not taken, your next line of action will be that then I quit. But winners don't quit, and quitters don't win. So then you have to make do with the situation. And it's also part of the learning curve because champions die hard. You need to stay in, fight the system to succeed. And that comes with spending a lot of energies. And it's quite frustrating. It is not normally said in the open, but it's very, very frustrating. If you talk with any champion, especially environmental champion in any society, I'm sure the person is going to tell you exactly what I am telling you. It is an obstacle, but some of us have determined to succeed no matter what it takes. So we are still soldiering on. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think I will point out to some of the practical issues which are biggest obstacle I see. Over 80% of the academics will be spending more than half of their time just writing the research proposals. And only 5 to 10% get success. The current kind of, the environment is such that a majority of the time people are running after that. Can we get the grant so that we can do the research? And in the process, we lose the longevity of the research. So we saw from Professor Flaggen's presentation, and I was alluding to the same thing, we still do not have the regulations for indoor air, ultrafine particles, non-exhaust emissions. And we know that they're going to become important. Some of them are already important, and they are affecting us in all ways. So this is where I think these, the bigger agencies and the councils which are funding the research comes into play, that could they identify the programs, or could they have some specified program that can specifically fill those research gaps that could allow to make the better decision making, which doesn't happen currently, or happens very little. And I believe that this is not the situation just for the UK, it's the situation everywhere. The another, the quite kind of, the interesting thing is that we have that, the lack of collaboration among the researchers and the policymakers. So you do a fantastic research, but as I was alluding to, it's very pinpointed in the sense that how much research, how much science in making goes in science in practice. And this is a barrier which is breaking slowly. I could see, at least in the UK, that lots of these grants, they want the multidisciplinarity, they want actually to bring, the bigger community together. But that is a big kind of, the hurdle, which is still, we see that. The another thing which is quite common, and you can quite see that scientists are brilliant in producing technical jargon. And they are paid to produce the jargon. And that ends up in papers, that ends up in reports, that ends up in deliverables for the projects. But the fact is that there is no mechanism which allow them to exploit that research for the end users. In fact, the grant ends, funding ends, job done, fantastic, you get your 5-star, whatever the ratings you have. But at the end of the day, did we really do the justice to the funding we get? This is the public money. It has to help the community. It has to help the environment. You have done your job, but the job is not done until it's reached actually to the people for whom that funding was given. And that's one of the biggest hurdles and challenges I see currently. Thank you.
One of the challenges and opportunities we have is to remind us what unites us, and to think about the way in which many of us are united by the hopes and dreams we have for every child to reach her or his full potential free from the harm of air pollution. And in 2010, I had the joy and privilege of helping to co-create an organization called Moms Clean Air for Psicomadres. It's now 1.5 million moms and dads and aunts and uncles and caregivers who are united by a community that believes and works together to ensure that every child can live a life free from the harms of air pollution. And we need to find more ways to try to communicate with each other and to work together.
So I do have additional questions, but I wanted to see if there's any questions in the room before I moved on to any other questions I might have. And also we do have the ability to ask questions online. If you want to, you can email. It should be on the screen, Haagen-Schmidt.awards@arb.ca.gov. Barbara. Could you, I'm sorry, just so that the people online can hear you.
Thanks, Pat. Yeah, Barbara Finlayson-Pitts. A number of you have referred to the fact that, the end game in this whole thing is how does air pollution and climate change affect human health? And how do you make that connection all the way through? It's my experience in general has been that when you try to get funding to do things, you can be funded to do the science. It's National Science Foundation, maybe. You can do the health, that's National Institutes of Health. And so there doesn't seem to be, there are not a lot of places that will support that whole breadth of research, bringing it all together for one assessment and being able to do the science and the health exposure and the impacts and then translation to policy. And that seems to me to be a big problem with stovepiping and the way we do things in the US. And I think, Prashant, you mentioned it sounds like the UK as well. So I'm wondering if you folks have any comments on how we might get around that.
It's a very real problem. And the funding agencies are not helping with that. The approach that I've tried to take is when I get a question from someone in a medical school or a medical practitioner or someone in a very different field, if there's a way that I can help, I'll start out not worrying about the funding. That I will invest my own time to try to help. Sometimes one can actually make progress in that approach. Ultimately, it does require crossing that bridge. And the funding is the bottleneck. NIH will not support funding if you don't have a strong medical component to it, regardless of whether or not the work you're doing is going to directly impact human health. NSF, if it has a medical component to it, will stay away from it because that's NIH's job. EPA's funding budget is too small to have much impact. CARB supports funding, but it's primarily focused on state institutions and private institutions within the state. While they were at one point well supported by CARB, bottlenecks were put in the way that have made that much more difficult, and very few proposals come from within state private institutions. Outside the state, it's possible. Within the state, it seems to be impossible. I don't know how we deal with the funding institution question, the funding agencies, but I do think that we have to take it on ourselves to try to find ways to bridge those gaps and to make some investments in doing it. Not always worrying about, can I totally support this within my own group?
I also wonder if there's a role for policy in helping to create kind of a virtuous cycle to create the pull on the funding and the research. And so EPA recently adopted new light medium duty standards that have limits on particulates, limits on carbon dioxide, limits on a whole number of contaminants, all reflected in the same set of standards. It's integrated. It helps ensure that we're thinking about addressing all of the harmful pollutants sort of together. CARB is considering moving forward with new landfill emission standards. And, do those standards address methane and the benzene? You think about the Chiquita landfill in Southern California. How do we continue to sort of think about a comprehensive approach that protects people and communities and the climate kind of in a very integrated, holistic way? And will that help create some positive feedback loop for the funding and for the resources?
Are there any other questions?
Hi, my name is Robert Van Buskirk. I've worked with Kofi for many years. One of the things that sort of hits me in the face as someone who does work in Africa is how to address this incredibly stark sort of difference in priorities. So I work on getting electric cooking to poor people in Africa. About 2 to 3 billion people in the world still cook on dirty biomass fuels, and it kills about 2 million people a year. Yet we just had a meeting where the lives of those 2 million people a year lost was not even referenced, and we're talking about air quality. What's up with that?
So,
Except in Prashant's personal experience.
yeah, I think you rightly said that those 2 million, but the fact is there are a lot of unaccounted death that does not come to the books. So number in reality is big. When you say about how do you prioritize the work in those communities, I believe that one of the things which I've been kind of raising in my talk as well is the involvement of the communities. But a lot of the times, actually, those decisions are made at the top level, and those decisions are then put onto the people that you have to now adopt this because this is good for you. The problem with that approach is you have got a solution, but if the person does not understand that this is going to good to me, it's not going to help. The fact is that you go to the doctor and the doctor gives you a pill by telling you that if you take this, this is going to do this. But what we are doing is we are just giving a pill actually to a person by saying that, you just have this one and it will sort out your problem there. So one of the main kind of, the gaps I usually see is that there is a very little involvement in decision making of the people who are really affected at the ground. And that's very difficult. It's not easy because the priorities of the people are different. For example, the people who are living in the poverty, for them, air pollution is not a problem at all. For them, the most important thing is, can they get the food on the table? Can they have got their houses actually, which is not dripping when it's raining? Can they have the clothes to wear? Could they have the schools actually for the children to go? So their priorities remains on that thing. And this is basically the cycle. When the priorities moves on, then you will see that if everyone is having this one, they start thinking now, how can I have a better life? Can I have a car? Can I have a good education for my children? And when they have that, then they start thinking, now I think we need to start to worry about the environment or the things which are happening. So there is no silver bullet. It's a very genuine question you asked, and it's a very difficult one. But the fact is that we need that ownership actually, in those solutions. And if you have them, then the fact is the impact of the solutions will be much, much bigger.
Make a little response. Where I work, people see the problem. So it's not the. I think your microphone's on. Red light's on. So people see the problem. It's not that they don't see the problem. The fact is there's a billion or two. Press it. Oh, there we go. Okay. The fact is there's a couple billion folks who have 10 to 100 times less money than us, right? And because they have 10 to 100 times less money, their lives are worth 10 to 100 times less in our global economic system. And because their lives are worth 10 to 100 times less, the amount of money invested in solving their problem is 10 to 100 times less, right? And so when you have half of the world where 10 times less money is being solved on, spent on the problem, then 10 times more people die, right? That is the fundamental inequality that sort of is, you know, we talk about environmental justice, but environmental injustice is often a reflection of the economic injustice.
There is another issue that compounds this effect. We have many academic researchers who would love to try to help on those problems. But when it comes down to a faculty member being reviewed for promotion or tenure, work that is done that is focused on trying to solve these local problems with people who are not so vocal is given lower value than the pure science work, substantially lower value. And so there's a very strong disincentive for academics to join in and try to work closely with those communities. I heard at a conference yesterday from a young former faculty member who was denied tenure on exactly these grounds. This is a very serious issue within academia. The bean counting that is done as one looks at promotion and tenure in universities is focused strictly on the beans that people have figured out how to measure and how to quantify, and not on the impact. And what we really need to be doing is to moving academia also towards looking at the real impacts of the work. And that needs to examine what's going on with the people involved and to treat work trying to solve these problems as what it is, as a very valuable contribution to the human race.
Thank you all. And if there are not other questions, I do have one last one, unless there's one in the room or online. Oh, okay.
Someone submitted something, my apologies.
All right, I'm gonna finish out on a question of, you have CARB staff here and other young professionals in the air quality and climate change world, both in the room and online. And so I was wondering if you have any advice that you would give to early career professionals in this area on how they can make a difference in addressing climate concerns and air quality concerns.
I can start with, the one thing I found the most rewarding is the collaboration. So if you are a new young researcher or early career researcher, I would strongly suggest that look out, come out of your desk, don't be shy, reach out to the people and try to develop those collaborations. Now, while you're doing that, this is always the tendency that we want you to work with the best, and there's nothing wrong with it because you learn from them and that helps you grow your profile. But at the same time, collaboration is a two-way street. You always have something which you can share with the people who can benefit from you. So don't always look upward, look downward as well to establish those collaborations so that you can not only benefit, but the others can benefit from you as well. The other thing I would strongly suggest is don't run after the quantity of the work. focus on the quality. Do less with high quality. But think that what is the end goal? What do you want it to achieve? Let's say if you are carrying out a study, is this the end goal just to do a paper? Or is this the end goal to do a little bit more than that? And that could include that, okay, I'm doing it for a particular region, how I can synthesize, how I can find the simple, make this research accessible to the people who do not understand the science. It's a difficult job, but this is becoming increasingly important in the current world, where the grants are becoming multidisciplinary. They expect actually, the people to make an impact when it comes to the, to the real world. And at the same time, just to reiterate that whatever resources you're getting is coming from the public funding. So do not forget that. The money you're using is not your money. It's the money given to you to do the work which should benefit the environment, the society, or the economic, the growth of the country, or to the place wherever you're living there. So I think this is basically the 3 points actually from my side for the young researchers. Thank you.
Yes, I think that dreaming of becoming an environmental champion is a noble task, worthy of pursuing. So I think you need to first equip yourself. You need to have the requisite background. If it is environmental science, good. Engineering, that is a good starting point. And avail yourself also for every opportunity that will help you cut your teeth by way of internship with any of the environmental and the engineering jobs around. Let me quickly add that this area, if you are obsessed with money, then that is not your area. It's an area that calls for people who are ready to sacrifice. You first have to sacrifice and build your capacity. And I will also say that in this pursuit, anytime somebody tells you it is impossible, be very happy. It means that you are very close to success. I will give you my life experience. In 2022, when I decided to take the fight to the doorsteps of Montreal Protocol, I met some bulwarks in the protocol who told me that, Kofi, what you are asking the Montreal Protocol to do for you is absolutely impossible. The Montreal Protocol doesn't deal with equipment. So what you are asking for amounts to hitting your head against the wall. You are going to bleed for nothing. Then I told myself, yes, it means that I am close to success. So I pursued. And the day the mallet went down, bang, decision accepted. He was the first person to come and congratulate me. So I will tell you that any dead fish can swim downstream, but it takes a very live and vibrant fish to swim upstream against the current. So you need to position yourself well, psych yourself up that you are not going to allow yourself to be discouraged by what the naysayers will say. In fact, we have a lot of naysayers in this area that we are operating. That space is full of naysayers. Forget about them. Follow your passion, and success will certainly smile at you if you take the appropriate and the cautious steps. Thank you.
Those were wonderful comments. I would like to support them in a way, looking more on the technical side of things. I showed an instrument that we build that failed. One of the important lessons is don't be afraid of failure. If something fails, at least you've tried. And I've had many things I've tried that have failed. Some of them have failed after they were published, and I've been the first to acknowledge the failures, but also some problems. I've developed this scanning mobility particle sizer. It's a commercial instrument. It's used around the world. I was the first person to recognize its major deficiencies, and I've spent considerable time over the last 3 decades trying to resolve those deficiencies and improve that measurement. I admitted my failure. I admitted that we oversimplified at the beginning. Don't be afraid of it. Embrace it. You got something out there. What you need to do is to be bold in what you undertake. If you have something that you think can make a difference, go for it. Take a chance. If you don't take chances, it's not research. Not all research is successful. But you need to also be very careful along the way. And here I'll just take a quote from a fellow who was a very good friend of mine, who was the president, became the president of University of Michigan long after I had him when he taught his first course there as an instructor. He went on to be the president of the National Academy of Engineering. This was Chuck Vest. And what he said was, whatever you do things right. Don't go halfway, but always do the right thing. Make sure that you're trying to have that impact. And if you do that, you will have that impact. I think I'll stop there.
It's beautiful. That's great. Just a couple of additional thoughts. The California Air Resources Board is, grappling with systemic challenges. These are really difficult issues that you have to address and wake up in the morning and take on. And that can weigh on your soul. That can have a really heavy weight. And if you follow your heart, if you work with people that you respect, if you trust yourself, you will do great work, and you will be doing your part, and you will find joy, and that is all you can do.
All right, I want to thank once again all of our award winners and thank everybody for attending as well. That was a great discussion, really stimulating, and really look forward to people to giving awards tomorrow at our board hearing. And we also hope that everybody here will nominate your clean air hero for the next round of Haagen-Smit Awards. And we'll actually start bringing those awards nominations in November 1st. So once again, thanks to all of our award winners.